we are delighted to have Mark Cushing not only with us today, but involved with us and involved with NAIA, and we're delighted that he's here, and he's going to be very exciting and give us all kinds of good, useful information. Please give Mark Cushing a warm welcome. Thank you.
My background, real briefly, I'm from Oregon, grew up in a small town west of Portland, which used to be a little hick farm town called McMinnville. There you go. I went to Stanford. While I was gone, McMinnville became the center of the Oregon wine industry, and I discovered when I was in California that McMinnville became cool. I began to hear from people who had said they'd spent the weekend in McMinnville, and I'd think, well, who died? Why would you possibly do that? So I went to Stanford and came back an attorney and practiced in Portland. I was a trial lawyer, a business trial lawyer, tried a lot of cases. Believe very strongly in the jury system. Like voters, juries most of the time get it right, and I'm happy to debate that with folks that disagree. I think, in fact, voters and juries mainly get things right. But I did politics on the side, and I had a fascinating 15 years in Oregon. I ran a lot of campaigns. I ran governor's campaigns. I ran congressional and a variety of campaigns. I was a speechwriter. What I found when my candidates won, I would get a phone call from clients saying, I know you're trying cases, Mark, but would you mind talking to the governor about X or this and that? And so I began to develop a lobbying practice, and I've always been involved in politics. I left the state in '92 to run a government systems company in Atlanta, and all I did was work with about 35 state governments and the provinces of Canada and a handful of foreign countries. And everything I did every day engaged me with state government, engaged me with lobbyists. I was a client as well as a lobbyist myself. I then got the chance and was in Washington, D.C. for a number of years as a partner in a large firm concentrating in two areas, federal lobbying for clients, as well as state lobbying, and local lobbying. I got the chance to come back to Oregon last June, so my practice is based here in Portland now, and I have an office in Washington, D.C., but I spend my time in both places. The best thing that happened the last year was I got introduced to Patty Strand through a mutual friend, and I've become involved with NAIA, and the extraordinary challenge, but more the opportunity that this organization has. And part of what I want to discuss today is that, I look at politics as a lobbyist, and I'll be real simple. I view lobbying as having one goal. The only reason you hire me or someone or you go lobby yourself is to win. That's why you lobby, ethically and legally, but your goal is to win. And do it in a way that you can come back the next time and win again if you need to, because most of these fights aren't over the first time. So it's real simple with me. You want to win, you want the other side that's trying to do something bad to you to lose. And that's what you lobby yourself for, that's what you might hire a person to do. The problem that what I would call common sense responsible pet owners face, and I have guinea pig, cat, and 2 dogs, which might suggest I'm irresponsible having a whole mix in one house. But the problem is that the animal rights and the extremist organizations have annual budgets in excess of $150 million. $150 million to make your life difficult, to go into cities and counties and legislatures and win, because they have the resources to hire people, to do media, to do the variety of things you do to promote a cause, and it is not a fair fight if you're up against $150 million of political resources and you're just a small group of volunteers. You'll win sometimes, not because you're lucky, but because you're right. You'll win sometimes, but it is a lot harder, and the odds are much longer. And so one of the things that Patty and I have discussed is the need to take the National Animal Interest Alliance, which is a great group that represents such a broad array of dog, cat, other animal owners, other interests besides just companion animals, and as I would say, is the common sense owner's perspective, which frankly, about 60 to 65% of this country, if they understood it, would support, is to take that organization, working with the AKCs of the world and the other great organizations, and dramatically build up the resources to fight the fights and to win the fights against folks that are much better funded, who count on the organization to be disorganized, underfunded, who count on it not able to fight in one state if you're doing battle in another state, or one city if you're doing battle somewhere else. So my interest here is to help Patty and the organization really build up to where there's some resources to have a national group that can take state and local battles. The federal fight, frankly, there's a lot of good groups in Washington, D.C. that represent animal interests. Tremendous number of groups. I've worked with them. Some have been clients of mine. But the state and local battles, and frankly, the other sides figure that out. The state and local battles are where the battles are going to be won or lost that set the precedent to move state by state, city by city, and I think that's extremely important. So I was thrilled to come today. I want to talk about lobbying. My focus is on how you lobby as citizens, how people lobby. And I have more than one suggestion. You might think my suggestion is hire a lobbyist. I have a good one in mind, but that's not my point. You asked a question, a very good question of Ryan Deckert, and I'm glad he left, because the first rule about talking about lobbying is make sure the politicians left the room. You don't want to have them sit here and hear all your secrets. But the most effective lobbying is done by citizens. You hire someone in one of two situations. You hire someone when the other side is well-funded and it's a big issue and you know they've got the resources. If the other side's well-funded and they've got the resources and it's a big issue, beware of going into it without some professional help. But often the professional help is getting you, the citizen, in a position to be the advocate. I took someone to meet a congressman the other day, and within 24 hours, the congressman called and said, I'm giving a speech tomorrow on the floor on a bill, and I need some help on some points. I had my client send the congressman 10 points to make under his name, not my name. I didn't need a pat in the back. You know, my job was to have the client be effective, because the person, the company, the citizen means a lot more, as Ryan said, than a professional lobbyist. But lobbyists are tour guides, and it's a rough world sometimes, and you need a tour guide. So I think if you're up against a tough opponent and they're well-funded and it's a big issue, I would think about, don't we need a lobbyist to quarterback this? Because mainly what I do is manage. I mean, I advocate for a living, but I mainly manage, and I'd keep that in mind. But I've got a set of what I call rules of lobbying. They're mine. There's 16 points. The number 16 had no particular, I just stopped. When I hit 16, I realized I'd put down each point that mattered to me. So let me go through these and see if they're helpful. And what I propose is to take about half an hour to go through these. And then I'd like to have a good 20-minute, half an hour discussion with you about specific issues, maybe experiences you've had in particular battlegrounds, you know, problems you faced, successes you had, just to reflect on that and see if there's some ideas that can be shared. We'll take a break then and come back and talk about the animal law issues like guardianship and some others. Let me see here. Yeah. I went to law school to avoid this, but I think I can figure it out. Now, Ryan Deckert makes this first one easy. This first point of mine, to me, sums up effective lobbying, and probably half you go, my God, I couldn't disagree more. It helps if you like politics. Better yet, if you like politicians. Now, Ryan Deckert, by the way, is a great example of that. If every politician was Ryan Deckert, it'd be pretty easy to like them. But this, to me, is critical. And you won't be surprised, probably, how many citizen groups go lobby city halls, county governments, legislatures, and they have nothing but contempt for politicians. They think they're bums. They don't like them, and then they're surprised at the end of the day when they didn't get the result they wanted. I have a simple rule that's behind this rule. You know, why is this sort of silly point, perhaps, to me, the heart of effective lobbying? Remember what you do in the political process. Never forget this. You're asking someone who doesn't have to help you to do something for you. The day before they met you, they weren't thinking about your issue. The day after they meet you, they don't have to think about your issue. They don't have to lift a finger for you. They may never see you again. But for some period of time, you're asking someone who doesn't have to help you to help you. Now, you think it's obvious. You think, of course, they should help me. We're right. We're correct. We have the right view of this. But if you don't like the process, and if you don't like politicians, then you're starting out on a hole. You need to approach it in a positive frame of mind, and it's hard for some people to do. Some people want to go lobby and blow the place up, not physically, but in fact, guess what? Politicians figure that out. They know someone across the table who has nothing but contempt for them and thinks they're crooked, corrupt, stupid, whatever, lazy, name the things that we say about politicians. My suggestion, from the heart, approach the process with respect and interest. If you want to be involved, read about politics. It's pretty interesting. I mean, it's like Churchill says, it's the best of the systems we have, the democracy, democratic process. Read about it. Find some way to enjoy it if you're going to be involved. Not just so you have fun, it'll come across to the politicians. And I have found that time and again to be effective. I can tell my opponent violates this rule, and I'll ride that horse all day, and it can be very effective. Now this point follows from the first one. Always make the politician's job easier, not harder. Your first thing when you have a meeting, when you write a letter, when you do an email, when you make an approach to a politician, ask yourself, is what I'm doing going to make their decision easier or harder? If it's going to make it harder, stop whatever you're doing and don't do it. Do something different, okay? And ask yourself, I ask myself that. Now, how do you make their job easier? Okay, one of the ways you make the job easier is make the information that you have simple and accessible. Make it short, not long. If you have one really good point, don't bury it in the third page of a memo. Make it the first paragraph of the first page and consider stopping after the first paragraph. It's so amazing to me how often this rule is violated. You'll see people hand politicians these 10-page documents, and I'll take as a given that every word in those 10 pages is intelligent, smart, true, powerful, persuasive. And I think Ryan Deckert's terrific. There's not a day in the week an elected official is going to read all 10 pages. They just aren't going to do it. Why? Because it's hard. Not because they're lazy, but because they've got 50 other issues that day they decided to get through. And so give him the information in a fashion that is easier to access. And generally that means shorter. It almost always means shorter. The other part of this rule that I think is so important is, and Senator Deckert mentioned it, when you're trying, and particularly in our battles, when you're trying to convince a politician that if you take our approach, you'll make a broader group of people happy. It'll be a common sense, more practical solution. One of the things you do is bring to the table the other people that you say will be comfortable with your approach. Do the work of bringing to the process the various interests in the community that are on your side, that you think will support this. They take it as a given that your organization supports what you're there asking for, right? But if I'm making a claim that there are about 10 groups that will work with us on this, so that you'll be on the side, Senator, of a broad group, not just one narrow group, you do the job of bringing those other people to the table. Don't just point them and say, call so-and-so. Do that work for them. I mean, what's a dream day for a legislator? They get a short, concise statement of an issue. The person pushing that issue has brought together, by email, by phone, by however, brought together the broader group that would support this, has already seen the proposal, has already looked at it, and they come back and say, you know what, we could live with that. You were so far down the road that if you walk in with a righteous, we're right, they're wrong, our group feels this way, and trust us, other people will support you. They don't want to trust you because they want you to do the work for them. So make their job easy, not harder, and ask yourself if what you're doing fits that. Now, this is interesting because Senator Deckert might have said otherwise. With whom do I want to meet? Do I want to meet the public official or staff? In my experience, 98% of the time you want to meet with staff. I want to talk about the exceptions in a second, but this is so important. I have clients all the time say to me, I want to meet with the governor. I'll say, oh, really? That's interesting. Why do you want to meet with the governor? Well, I want to meet with the governor. I want to talk about this issue. I'll say, not going to happen. Not a good idea. not even a remotely good idea. To try to get 30 seconds on the governor's calendar when all the governor will do afterwards is take the staff member who let me in for the meeting and say, what in God's name are you thinking putting this person on my calendar and wasting my time? Guess what? Staff run the world. One of the most depressing things for someone who works Congress as much as I do, there's just a sea of 27-year-olds running the U.S. government. Doesn't matter if you're Democrat or Republican. It's amazing. All my meetings are with people the age of my children. I'm looking at them going, how did you get any authority to do anything? And the fact that we're not paying them much just makes it worse, you know. But it's a remarkable experience. But guess what? I've had to eat a lot of humble pie and have a 24-year-old who I think I could run circles around. I have to sit and listen and deal with them. But guess what? Politicians rely on staff. In some cases, the staff member is weak, or the staff member secretly was, you know, the HSUS representative forever and frankly has no interest. You can find that out. But for the most part, they rely on staff. Ask to meet with staff. Always meet with staff first. Ask the staff if you think it'd be good to meet with the senator or the representative or the mayor or whomever. Let the staff tell you. Let them make it easy for them. Give them the material so they look smart to the staff, to the senator or the member. And don't insist on meeting with the member. I ran a lottery systems company. I was in the gaming world, okay? And I'll never forget a lobbyist for me. And I've been a lobbyist on the other side once. The lobbyist said, when he was trying to convince me to hire him, I want you to come to, I think it was Missouri, come to Jefferson City. We're going to meet the governor. I said, oh, that's a great idea. So when the reporter comes in and checks the governor's appointment schedule the next day, it'll say, President of Gaming Company. That's a good meeting he wants to have in his calendar, isn't it? I said, why do I want to meet with the governor? Do I want to meet with the governor so I think that you know the governor? I'm assuming you do. You're my lobbyist. But that's not what we need to do. We need to talk to staff and get things done. I mean, make staff all the time unless the senator or the member wants to do it differently. Now, this is sort of my earlier point. And do any of you, are you fans of Elements of Style by Wilfred Strunk and White, this old book about how to write? E.B. White, who did Charlotte's Web. I know I'm old because I was in my son's English class and this teacher said she hadn't heard of that book, and I thought, come on. This is the book that everybody should read. It tells you how to write short sentences concisely. It's a brilliant guide on good writing. But this is crucial in politics. This is absolutely crucial. Reduce your position or request to 60 seconds if you're speaking or one long paragraph. If you can't do it, keep trying until you succeed. No matter how complicated the issues are that we deal with in pet ownership and all the things associated with pet ownership, trust me, there's not a single issue that can't be reduced to one good paragraph or 60 seconds. Now, there's a whole book behind it, of course, and you want to have other information available. But force yourself to do that, because that one document kept in their hands, kept in their file, that concisely states what we want done is enormously powerful. Again, you've made their job easy, and you've made yourself a more effective communicator. This is a rule I follow. Now, a lot of interest groups don't like this rule because it basically suggests you don't get everything. But trust me, in politics, you generally don't get everything. This won't apply to all situations, but I try to look at issues this way. I break them into three categories. What's the one thing you have to have that's the win? Now, in some cases, that is simply killing a bill, killing an ordinance, okay? And there's no compromise. I understand that. There are certain circumstances where it's all or nothing. But at least go through the process. I think it's very useful of saying, okay, there's the one thing we have to have. There's 1, 2, or 3 things we'd like to have that would be worth pushing for. And then there's a wish list afterwards if it was just our lucky day and everything came our way, but be prepared to negotiate. And if you go into the political process and you're not prepared to negotiate, most of the time you'll have a bad experience. Some of the time it'll appear tough and firm, you know, and you can back it up, but try to do this if the situation fits. And it's also a good discipline within your group, because you realize there's like a real priority that if we got that, if the senator said, what do you want? And the one thing, and you said that, you go home and feel like you did a good job. And then you realize some other things fall off that, but maybe you come back the next session or the next go around to get that. Now, I'm an old trial lawyer. This is, I hope you do this, and I think it's the hardest thing to do in what I call issue advocacy. Now, if you're a paid lobbyist, you do this for a living. I say that like that's the lowest form, and maybe it is. My kids go, my dad's a lobbyist. Wow. But for issue groups, this can be very difficult. But let's go through this. Understand your opponent's position better than he or she does. Force yourself to articulate his or her arguments as positively as possible, then rebut each one. People generally are intellectually lazy. What do I mean by that? We often take our opponent's arguments and all we do is describe them the way we really feel about them or the way we really think about them, right? That's natural. It's human nature. And particularly when we're with friends or with fellow members of an issue group or an advocacy group like ours, it's easy to do that. And you end up dismissing the other side. And you get to a point, you can't imagine that a serious politician would ever entertain that idea. Well, you're only involved because some serious politician is entertaining the idea. And what I find is crucial, and it's hard work, but it's a discipline that if you follow it, you will be amazed how effective you are. Force yourself to make the other side's arguments better than they make them internally. Think it through, just from an intellectual standpoint. Even if you disagree with every premise, make sure you can do that. And then pick it apart one by one. I guarantee you if you do that, in your first or second meeting with a staff member or a politician about the issue, you'll have a chance to show it, and you'll blow them away if you can dispassionately, reasonably, fairly say, this is their view, and this is the reason for their view. And they'll make the case of X, Y, and Z. Not ranting or raving, just saying it. And say, you know, we've looked at that, and we understand what's behind it, but then if you consider, and you just go through and slice it apart, I've had this happen where an hour later, the other side met with the staff member, and they made the arguments that we just made. And the staff member already heard all the rebuttal. And it was kind of like, well, yeah, I know that, but what about this? What about that? And it's a very good technique. Maybe you do it already. I doubt you do, because most groups don't. Most groups dismiss their opponent's arguments or so quickly attack them that they don't get inside them and underneath them. So it's a technique that I hope you try. This is hard because some people legitimately deserve to be demonized. But I view this as just critical. And this comes from a courtroom, because in court you're sort of forced to be nice to the other side, and for a reason. Never demonize or personalize your opponents regardless of what you think of them. Because that violates rule number 2, make things easier for the politician, not harder. When you demonize an opponent, you put the politician in a tough spot. They don't want to feel that way. They're not comfortable refereeing a battle at that level if it's really personal or sort of, angels and devils. And it's hard to do sometimes when the groups that you're up against lobby and say things in the media the way they do. But it will always reflect better on you, and the politicians will really appreciate it. I've had some just say to me, if a group comes in and they start talking about the other side with so much animus and so much, anger, the politician just shuts down. They don't want to be in that discussion. That's not what they thought they got elected to do. It doesn't mean you can't feel strongly about your side. Of course, they need to see the passion. But there's a difference between being passionate about what we think should happen and demonizing or personalizing the other side. And I will tell you that in the world of animal rights and animal rights extremists, there's so many opportunities to violate this rule. And you just have to be careful, and I think the important thing is not to violate it. There is beauty in numbers. Put simply, the size of your grassroots supporters matter. Now, this is just good common sense, but if you've got a group of 10, try to make it 20. If you've got a group of 20, try to make it 100. If you've got 100, why stop there? It really is worth it to get people signed up for your side. And there's no number to stop at. And politicians count. They count for a living, don't they? They count for a living. They count for a living in votes to get elected. They count for a living in committees. And they count for a living in raising contributions. They know how to count. If you talk to politicians very long, they spend about half their day counting. That's just the nature of the democratic process. Raise money, get votes, get support on a committee. And the more the better. It's an obvious point, but I think what the other side has done so well, and how many times have you read the quote that a certain organization has 23,500 members of every congressional district? Well, by that count, basically 1 out of 5 people or so are members of that group. I don't think that's the case. But that number impresses people. And knowing how many support our view of the world, I don't think politicians have any remote idea how many people support what I would call common sense, pet owners' approach to issues. And I think, and I'll get to questions in just a minute, I think that building your group, if one person's assigned the analysis job and writing, make sure you're lining up people. Even if you just show to the politician the list of 500 people that support this. They don't have to do anything else. We were just involved, I'm Catholic, and our church in Portland Cathedral and school, where one of my children go, was just involved in this big issue about relocating of a street. And if you're in Portland, you've seen a bit about it. I won't bore you with it too much. And obviously, we thought we had the better of the argument, blah, blah, blah. We won. I think the main reason we won is that we made it real clear how many people, how many thousands of people viewed things the way we viewed them. And I think politicians thought about that. This just wasn't 3 smart people saying this is a good idea. And we really made an effort to show the numbers, and I can't emphasize that too strongly. Now, despite there's beauty in numbers, when you meet with staff or a politician, my general rule is keep the number of people to a few. Now, when you have a hearing, if the Senate, Health Committee is meeting up here, yeah, you want every single person in the room to be with your organization. So this isn't applying to hearings. Pack hearings. Never let the other side pack hearings. Get there an hour early. Have somebody, their only job is to get your seats taken. Pack the room. It has a real impact on people. I saw it recently. If the whole room is full of one side, about an hour into the hearing, it's kind of like, God, this is, does anybody support the other side? It's a very effective technique. But in the small group meetings, if you have a chance to meet with the chief of staff, to the mayor, keep the number of people small. The reason is you'll be more effective. Everybody will want to talk otherwise, and you really want to have it coordinated. So I just point that out. The exception to there's beauty in numbers is if it's an individual meeting. We heard a phrase yesterday, grassroots and grass top. I just want to make a point. It doesn't always apply, but I think it can be helpful. Grassroots is what we all know. Grassroots are the individuals that own cats, own dogs, or animal control officers are involved. And showing them and getting them involved, of course, that's rule number 1. What grass tops are the people that you analyze and figure out are key people in the life or the politics of the particular politician. And what I try to do is always have 2 levels of lobbying. You try to build the grassroots group as big as you can, but I try to figure out who does that senator listen to? Who's important politically in their life? It can even go down to, I have friends that have a business doing this. They have a business as lobbyists, and all they do is they figure out the 10 people that are most important to a member of Congress in their personal life. Maybe someone they golf with, or a minister, whomever, and they try to get those people to care about an issue, and they'll send a letter to the congressman. Dear Congressman X, you may not have thought I cared about, dangerous dog ordinances, but actually, and they tell a story. And my point is, you can't do it like that every time, of course, but it's worth the effort to think about and figure out who is close to or who matters to the politician. Sometimes it's a job. Sometimes it's within the work, their work. In case of a citizen legislature, they go home to a job. Sometimes it's the company they work for. You'll find people there. Or it could be a soccer coach. It's worth doing that to try to figure out who else can have an impact on them besides just you walking in the front door. This one's sort of obvious. Be an expert, truly, but try not to show it. I think it is so important to spend the time to really understand the issue. I'm looking at one of the speakers, Bo, from yesterday. I was so impressed with the morning group. I mean, those are people that knew their profession so well. And I think you want to have a quality when you meet with a politician where somebody in the group really, truly knows what they're talking about and has a level of expertise. And you don't say, I'm an expert, you don't brag about it, but it just comes out. And I have generally followed this practice. The smartest person in a discussion, as long as they're not annoying and they don't talk forever, hopefully I'm not violating both, but if you have a really smart person on your side who knows how to talk, and sometimes not say very much, you'll have an enormous impact with politicians. I have a client right now on the healthcare reform issue, which every state's looking at, how to change and improve healthcare reform, which will happen until the end of time, I'm sure. And I had an amazing experience where I didn't know him that well, and I took him in to meet some very senior level political figures on a very complicated issue. And I watched this person. I mean, they were, they were like kittens at a bowl of cream. And he wasn't funny. He was just so smart. He was so knowledgeable. He was level-headed. He didn't attack the other side. He just sort of laid out the case, and I realized he was just a really, really intelligent person on the issue. And what do you think the politicians wanted? They were dying to talk to a smart person because they foolishly have taken on this huge issue, solving health care. I mean, foolishly, of course, we'd like them to do that, but from their perspective, they're dying for a good idea and for someone to help them sort things out and analyze it. It was one of the most effective lobbying meetings I've ever been in. And my job was to say, Senator, meet X. At the end of the meeting, I said, thank you for the meeting. I was brilliant. I delivered those 2 lines extremely well. And I just let the client talk, and he was so smart. So my point is, it is worth being a true expert and just communicating that, because politicians are deathly afraid of making a mistake. Why? Some because they're motivated from the heart. They want to do the right thing. They don't want to do the wrong thing. A lot because they want to get reelected. And one of the ways you get defeated is by doing dumb things, doing stupid things publicly that are called out publicly, and all of a sudden you're defending a record that's not very impressive. How do you avoid doing stupid things? Well, do smart things and also understand the issue. And the person that supplies them real knowledge is hugely valuable. So it's maybe an obvious point, but I think it's worth saying. All right, forget every other rule I've said. This is the one you take to the bank. Listen to the questions the staff or politicians ask, which requires you to not talk. You have to listen. Listen to the questions the politicians or staff ask. Drop everything else and answer those questions first. When I first tried cases, I had my first argument in the Oregon Court of Appeals, and the chief judge was Judge Schwab, who's passed away. And it's sort of intimidating, but very exciting. Your first time in the Court of Appeals. It's a beautiful courtroom. The 3 judges on the panel sit there. And, I had really prepared the argument. I was clearly the smartest person in the world on that issue, I was sure. I had all these great points to make. And I'm up there at the podium, and I'm about 3 minutes in, and Chief Judge Schwab asked me a question. To this day, I cannot believe the words that came out of my mouth, but they only came out of my mouth one time. Bright, young, 26-year-old lawyer, I said, thank you, Judge, for the question, and I will address that, but the point I want to make. And he looked at me, and I saw my career pass over my head, and I actually had, because my dad was a lawyer, maybe I had this skill, I actually thought to myself, I didn't say it out loud, but I thought to myself, I remember it so clearly, I thought to myself, is it possible, Mark, to be more stupid than you are right this minute? I mean, he just asked you the question, which is probably what he wants to have answered, that G might be the way he would decide the case, and he is the chief judge, but no, you're so smart, you're going to tell him to park his question over here while you drive over here and show him some other wonderful things you've studied. you might consider another profession. So I actually said to Judge, I said, excuse me, Your Honor, my apologies, of course, and I stumbled my way through and answered the question. He decided the case on that issue, of course, and I've never forgotten that, and I violate that rule. I mean, you're never perfect, but it's true with judges, and it's very true with politicians. With judges, you'll often get a really smart question that's narrow, and you'll think, no, it's a different issue, but you realize you got to answer it. It's different with politicians often. Often the question truly has nothing to do with anything. And you're sitting there going, why would they care about that? Or you're thinking to yourself, that's the wrong question. No, you want to answer it. I mean, you have all these 10 reasons why it's a dumb question. But trust me, drop everything else, answer that question. Then you can go back and say everything you want to say. I am always amazed when I have meetings with politicians with the other side. One of the first things I look for is that test. That's such, so deep in me because of that first experience. And the minute I watch the other side not do that, I mean, I have like a smile from ear to ear. I'm thinking to myself, this one's over. We are winning this battle right now because they don't have a clue what they just did. Because the politician sorting through a million things is trying to figure something out. And for whatever reason it's on their mind, get it to them. If you can't answer it right then, which often you can't, what do? You simply say, we'll be back to you and have some absurd amount of time. We'll be back to you tomorrow, even if it would require you to study for 24 hours. Get back promptly, because that's the way they're looking at it. And if they ask you 5 questions, answer all 5 before you do anything else. And by the way, when they ask a question, it's a gift. It's a gift. They're saying to you, we might decide this your way. Here's what we want to hear. And so you don't have to sit and figure out what's going to drive them. So be happy they do, but make sure you jump on it. This point is more tacky and purely political, and for citizens sometimes they hate to even think about this, but I have to make it. Understand the pure politics of the issue and the legislative situation and frame what you're doing accordingly. It's not a civics contest. Politicians care about their career, they care about relationships with other politicians. Have somebody in your group, or many times this is what the lobbyist does. What the lobbyist does is say, all right, Senator Deckert is trying to get a bill out of this other committee that he has told his constituents is the reason he ran for re-election, and it really matters to him. So that chairman of that other committee is critical. So you think about that politics, and if you can get that chairman of another committee interested in your view, and that chairman supports your view, it's not a trade. There's nothing illegal about that. It's the way the political process works. But you're understanding the political dynamic, not just the who's right, who's wrong. And always think that through in terms of analyzing the votes on a council. And my point is, you wish you could walk in the front door, make your arguments, they say, you're right, thanks, we won't do that bad thing, we appreciate your help. That occasionally happens. But you want that dimension, but you want the dimension of really figuring out politically what's driving this and have that analysis. And anybody can do it. I mean, politics is not a refined art. It's just you got to know enough to do it. And again, sometimes that's what lobbyists do, but it's worth the effort. Because a lot of times you wonder why you're up against, like your point, sir, about deals that are made, or committee, and you don't realize what's happening, and you can solve that. You can actually get involved because you got to figure out who's the other person causing a problem. I have a lot of bills that get in trouble not because the person has any thought about the bill. It's some other thing that they're doing in the process, and I've got to go reach and figure that out and turn that around, and then good things can happen. I've learned this as an old schooler, but I do think it's all email these days. So don't fight with letters or hard copies unless you have no choice or are asked to do so. There was a time about 5 years ago where you'd often hear people say, I think they prefer it in writing. They don't want to get it in an email. I don't do anything seriously in politics these days, from Congress down to City Hall, that I can think of that's not via email, in terms of my communication to them. I mean, we have meetings, we have phone calls. I'm not saying you don't communicate other ways. But if you want to get a point across, and I was glad to hear Senator Deckert make that point, it's easy to use emails, so use it. That's how they get information. They all have BlackBerries, like I do. I mean, they all live off that. Things on BlackBerry, by the way, are easier if they're shorter. And they're all traveling around town, doing things, driving home, whatever. And electronic communication is the way politics works, unless someone says to you, I want it in a hard copy. So I think that's just a simple task. Despite that point, at a hearing, have a PowerPoint. I fought PowerPoints forever. You know why I fought them? Because I don't know how to make them. I just literally don't know how to produce a PowerPoint. I have somebody do that for me. That's just how limited I am technically. But I realized that PowerPoints are effective. So use PowerPoints. People like to look up, they like to see your point, they want to think about it while you're saying something else maybe. So I strongly encourage you, unless the hearing doesn't allow it, put the argument in a PowerPoint and do make a hard copy of the PowerPoint and give it to staff. My last point is the sad fact of politics, but it's important. Fundraising and political contributions matter. Put another way, the off-season counts, so don't just show up when you have a problem. There's 2 points here. Let me make the non-financial point first, which is my last point. The off-season counts, that is when they're not in session or they're not sitting in the hearing. You all know this to be true. Too many groups show up, when something bad's about to happen or they really want something good to happen, and the politician doesn't know them. The staff doesn't know them. They haven't seen you before. They're glad to hear from you, but it's a lot different if you've been engaged with them much earlier. And I think given the number of battles we're all fighting and the certainty that there's more coming, it is extremely important to build year-round relationships with the political leadership in your areas. It's crucial. You want them when you walk in to say, hey, Mark, good to see you. Not, hi, I'm Bill Brown, what's your name, Mr. Cushing? You want them to know who you are. It makes a big difference. And the Wall Street Journal article that I know you all read on the HSUS involvement in the 2006 elections, everybody should read. It's a real eye-opener. One of the reasons it's a real eye-opener is the amount of money they're putting into political campaigns was made public. It is public, but it was summarized and put in that article. The point is, people do that for a reason. And one of the reasons, Patty and I have talked about, doing what we're wanting to do here and are doing is the other side of the issue has got to get engaged. There has to be a round-the-clock presence. It is very difficult to go up against a machine that's well-funded, that is supporting candidates and is out there at events and conferences all the time. It makes it look like everybody's on their side, and they're everywhere. And I think it's important at the local level, state level, federal level, to be involved politically. How do you do that besides contributions? But by the way, contributions matter. Why do they matter? Because politicians hate raising money. I know members of Congress that have to spend 2 hours a day on the phone calling for money. They loathe that process. Think about it. Hi, this is Congressman X. You have some chit-chat and you ask for money. Do you think they got elected to do that? Of course not. They hate it the way you would hate it. But the process requires it. Every contribution you make is one less phone call they have to make. It's appreciated. It's not a trade for a vote. It's the reason contributions are legal. The system, we don't, and I doubt anybody in this room supports having the government fund campaigns. So if you don't want government to fund campaigns, you need to support the process. And what I've learned is that the amount you give sometimes doesn't matter. If your group can give 50 checks of $20, it makes a difference. Because one of the things politicians count, to go back to that point, is the number of people that contributed. When they announced Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama's first quarter fundraising totals, sure, they mentioned 26 million, 25 million, but what else did they mention? The number of people that contributed. Because they know that that means something. So a lot of people think if we can't write a $1,000 check, it doesn't count. No. You can write a $10 check, it counts. $25 check, it counts. Get a bunch of people to do the same thing. It makes a difference. And one of the things you can do is you attend events and you bring the supporters who have the check, and suddenly they're in the process, and you're having conversations you wouldn't normally have. And you're educating them about what? Because what do you do when you give a check? You don't mail it. You talk to somebody for the candidate and let them know what your group cares about. And trust me, if they think the conversation involves a check, they'll talk about your issue. They understand that. Hi, I've got $1,000 from my client. Love to support the senator. Great. When can we meet? How about like in an hour? How about in 10 minutes? Where are you? I'll drive to you. You know, what works best? Would midnight work? Fine, we'll meet at midnight. And the point is, when you meet and you say, we support you, but I'd like to talk to you about, you know, breed-specific legislation. I'd like to talk to you about guardianship laws. They don't say, could care less, can I just have the check and can we get this over with? They never do that. What do they say? Talk to me about the issue. Let's talk. Who's your group? Oh, we represent 10,000 pet owners in your district. The math is already going in their head because they're thinking, well, if you brought a check of 10 people for $100 and you've got 10,000 more people behind you, I mean, that's the process. And too often, advocacy groups, particularly those that believe their views just make so much sense they ought to be law, too often advocacy groups don't do that. And I'd have to hear the situation. In fact, when I'm done, we'll have a good debate if you want. I'd love to hear the example of why you wouldn't participate financially. I'll be amazed if you win that argument with me, because it's the way the process works. And since the amount doesn't matter as much as the fact you do it, I just think that it's very important. And let it be small. Just have as many people as you can do it. Let me stop there.